said, and obviously Trump won, kind of making the case that, we should care about America first and crack down on immigration and et cetera. We all know what happened there. And then Trump became so popular, he kind of became a cult, right? And so they're really the only way to agenda set, so to speak, would be to influence Trump himself.
In today's video, David Pakman and Tim Miller unleashes on MAGA like never before on the David Pakman Show. For years, a lot of right-wing voices backed Donald Trump as an anti-war outsider. Now, with shifting policies, some of those same voices are starting to question everything. This isn't just left versus right. It's about credibility, media influence, and what happens when expectations don't match reality. But before we dive into today's video, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one.
Do you think, now we've seen all of these, I don't really want to call them mea culpas, but we've seen all of these around the whole Trump's the anti-war guy stuff.
Yeah.
We've seen words like betrayal used by some of the manosphere podcasters, and I never would have guessed that this was going to happen. Is your sense that they truly believed the whole I'm the real anti-war candidate thing and that now they're genuinely surprised? Or is your sense that they went along with it because they thought it was useful for getting Trump elected?
Yeah. I think they're both. And, it's hard to know what's in anybody's heart. So, I can only judge based on what I've seen of people's content and what I know about them. But I think some of the manosphere guys feel really betrayed, and for good reason. Like I watched the Andrew Schultz podcast for one example. He's a guy that had Trump on. I ripped him at the time. He gave a very friendly interview to Trump. They challenged him a little bit, but it was really soft and almost fanboyish. If you listen to his podcast now, or Tim Dillon, who's another comedian who is for Trump, if you listen to them for long enough, it's like this, maybe they're snowing me, but this feels real. Like, I think that there's a category of people that genuinely were sick of all the foreign wars, thought that Trump was kind of an outsider who was not beholden to the military industrial complex, and that he wouldn't get us into as many stupid wars. And he didn't last time. Obviously, we can debate the margins of what that means and what he actually did and didn't do in the first term. But he didn't do anything like Iran in the first term. And so I think that some of those guys feel betrayed. And I think that we should engage with them on that level and take their flip at good faith. I think that they're partisan hacks too. Tucker called Trump a demonic force in a private text message 5 years ago. Right. Tucker knew what he's signing up for. Okay. Tucker wants power and influence. Anybody that's in kind of that Fox Newsmax type, rah-rah Republican Party world, some of them maybe, were just, it kind of doesn't even really matter what they thought Trump's foreign policy was going to be. They were going to be for him no matter what. You know what I mean? They just wanted Trump to win and Kamala to lose because they're Team Jersey type guys. And so, I get a little flustered when I see people sharing the Tucker stuff, because I'm like, man, in the same interview where he's talking about how he feels bad about going along with Trump and how he feels betrayed, he's also he's making fun of my colleagues, Catherine Rampell at the Bulwark, and saying that, she was totally crazy to be in support of lawsuits to break up segregated country clubs. He does this whole rant in support of segregated country clubs in the same podcast. And so it's like, I worry that people hear Tucker talking about this war and they think that he's an ally and he's not. And so I think he's a different case than some of the guys who aren't political experts, went along for the ride, got snowed, got conned, and now are rethinking it.
Now, if you look at the data, it's not just a few podcasters speaking out. Polling from groups like Pew Research Center has shown that Republican voters, especially younger ones, have been trending more skeptical of foreign military involvement over the last decade. That's a big deal, because it explains why the anti-war outsider messaging actually landed in the first place. And here's the thing, during Trump's first term, the US didn't enter a large-scale new war, which helped reinforce that perception. But there were still major escalations, like the 2020 killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, which brought the US dangerously close to direct conflict with Iran. So the anti-war image was always a bit more complicated than people wanted to admit. That's why some of these reactions now feel genuine. A lot of people weren't deep into policy. They were were reacting to a vibe, a promise that things would be different. And when reality starts to drift from that, it creates that sense of betrayal you're seeing. At the same time, there's a clear split. Some voices in media, especially those tied closely to networks like Fox News, have historically aligned more with political power than with any consistent ideology. You can even look at leaked communications in the past where major figures privately criticized Trump while publicly supporting him. That tells you a lot about what's driving the messaging. So siding with Tim and David here makes sense. There are people who genuinely bought into the anti-war narrative, and those are the ones worth engaging with. But there's also a whole layer of influencers who knew exactly what they were doing, and that distinction matters, because if you treat everyone the same, you miss the opportunity to actually shift opinions, and that's where real change happens.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with you about how we should be like talking to and dealing with those folks. One of the things I've said is we should welcome them reconsidering, and that's great. But I think, and I'm curious your view, I think it's important also to mention this was not unpredictable. And we know that because there were dozens or hundreds of us that were predicting that this was exactly what was going to happen. So I think that it's important both to say, hey, you're not like shunned and blacklisted forever because you are now revisiting your views and saying, hey, I made a mistake. But also, let's not pretend that there was no possible way that anybody could have seen this coming, because there was.
Yeah. Look, I think the way I think about this is, if you have a friend or a cousin or an uncle or an aunt in your life who is mirroring the Tim Dillon, Andrew Schultz turnabout on this, and they are the type of person that you fought with a couple of times on your group text or over a holiday, but whatever, but you still are, it's somebody that you care about, right? And you are on the other side. What would you say to them right now? And maybe you'd say to them, I had some points. I think it's important to consider that you're getting bad information from the media outlets you're following. You'd think about how would you talk to them in a way that wouldn't make them say F you, right? Right. And different families are different personalities are different, but it's somebody that you care about, and you're not the type of family that likes to yell at each other. There are certain families like that, but if you're not that, you wouldn't go to them. You wouldn't go to the next family barbecue and be like, eat shit, Uncle Chris. I told you, dunked on you, like that wouldn't be productive. So I feel that way about this. It's important to mention that part of the reason why these guys got snowed is because they bought a bill of goods from Donald Trump and the people around him and the big media, influencers around him, including Tucker. And so they should be wary about that next time, and they should think about who was telling them the truth and who wasn't. I think that's totally fair to say and to bring up, if, we get invited on, I'm trying to go on those shows. And that's kind of what I would say to their audience. Just like, it's important to update your priors when you find out that somebody's been lying to you. And, so hopefully that is what happens in certain cases. We're seeing it in the polls. So I do think it's happening naturally.
This conversation really hits on something a lot of people are quietly dealing with right now. How do you respond when people start changing their minds? Because the truth is, this shift didn't come out of nowhere. There were years of warnings from policy experts, journalists, and even former insiders about what a second Trump term could look like, especially on foreign policy. Even during his first presidency, moves like pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal and escalating tensions in the Middle East were already signals of a more aggressive approach, even if they didn't turn into full-scale war at the time. At the same time, you can actually see this change showing up in the data. Polling from groups like Gallup has shown that support for overseas military action, especially among younger conservatives, has been declining, while skepticism toward intervention is rising. So when reality starts clashing with that expectation, it makes sense that some people feel like they were sold something that didn't quite match up. But the way Tim and David are approaching it is probably the smartest part. There's a difference between calling people out and actually changing minds. Political science research has shown that people are way more likely to reconsider their views when they don't feel attacked, when the conversation stays grounded instead of turning into, I told you so. And there's also the media factor. A lot of these beliefs weren't formed in a vacuum. They were shaped by a pretty tight ecosystem of influencers and outlets. When those same voices start shifting or contradicting themselves, it creates confusion, and that's usually when people start reevaluating. That's why this moment matters, not because people were wrong before, but because they're willing to rethink it now. Because in politics, changing your mind isn't weakness. It's actually the only way anything ever changes.
Who do you think is the most influential or are the most influential right-wing commentators right now? And I know that I could just look up audience size, but I mean more in like an agenda setting sense, the way that for a while, like Rush Limbaugh had this agenda setting power as to like, what are going to be the 2 or 3 things that this week or today are the things that we're talking about. Does that still exist on the right-wing messaging machine, or has it kind of become fractured?
It's become so fractured. I think that we're going to learn a lot in the next year to answer that question, because I think that in the pre-Trump era, there were a bunch of people clamoring for different roles and different types of influence. There's the more of the neo-con set, the more of the let's moderate on things, the more of the hard on immigration, set. And obviously Trump won, kind of making the case that, we should care about America first and crack down on immigration and et cetera. We all know what happened there. And then Trump became so popular, he kind of became a cult. Right. And so they're really the only way to agenda set, so to speak, would be to influence Trump himself. And so in that way, who had influence? It was like the Fox hosts because you watched Fox, or the people that had his phone number, right? Like those are the people that had, and that's been the case now for like 9 years. I mean, Tucker can claim that he has some agenda setting capabilities and et cetera. But frankly, time and again, up until basically Epstein and the war, the Republican base went along with whatever Trump wanted. And so there was no outside influence. You're starting to see that taper off now, and I think that it will be interesting to see kind of who emerges. Obviously, Tucker is trying to make a case for more of an America first, like real, authentic, kind of real communism has never been tried. Real America first has never been tried. Like, I'm going to do it the real way. You'll see Ben Shapiro is still, I think, waning a little bit in influence, but has a ton of influence with the White House, more of a traditional hawkish, foreign policy side of things. And so I think that's kind of where the stuff is going to net out. And I don't think that you can understate still like the influence of Fox. I mean, I like Fox. It's an older audience, but like Fox still, drives a lot of the conversation on the right, and the big anchors there still do.
When someone like Rush Limbaugh was at his peak, the ecosystem was way more centralized. One dominant voice could shape the talking points for millions of people every single day. But now the data shows that audiences are way more scattered. Cable news viewership, like Fox News, still pulls big numbers, but it's heavily skewed older. Meanwhile, younger audiences are getting their politics from podcasts, YouTube, and independent creators, which naturally fragments influence. And that fragmentation actually shows up in polling. Surveys from places like Gallup and Pew Research Center have found growing divides within conservative voters, especially on issues like foreign policy and government intervention. That wasn't nearly as visible a decade ago when messaging was more unified. What's interesting is how much of that unity used to revolve around Donald Trump himself. For years, influence wasn't about having the biggest audience, it was about proximity to him. If your message aligned with his, it spread. If it didn't, it got ignored. That's why TV hosts and a small circle of insiders had outsized power. But now that grip isn't as tight. You're seeing competing lanes open up. People like Tucker Carlson pushing one direction, Ben Shapiro pushing another, and neither fully controlling the narrative. That's why Tim and David's point lands. The system isn't just evolving, it's unstable. And when there's no single voice steering the conversation, people start questioning things more. And historically, that's usually when big political shifts actually start to happen